Whitney Dawson didn't expect her life to shift on the night she snuck onto the rooftop of her apartment building just to breathe. The city buzzed 20 floors below, horns and sirens echoing through the warm spring air, but up here, it was quiet until a voice cut through the silence. "You're my spot." Whitney's head whipped around. A man stood by the rooftop railing, dressed in a black button-up shirt with sleeves rolled to his elbows, no tie, and a watch that probably cost more than her rent. He wasn't angry, just amused. His dark brown hair was tousled like he'd run his fingers through it a few times too many, and his jaw was sharp enough to make her forget how to speak for a second. "I didn't see your name on it," she replied, gripping her sketchpad closer to her chest. He stepped closer, but kept his distance. "Nathaniel Langston." "There, now my name's on it." She let out a surprised laugh. "You live here?" "Top floor," he said, nodding toward the penthouse door behind him. "You?" "Floor 7. I just needed air." He glanced at the sketchpad. "You draw?" "I try." "It's not exactly paying the bills." Nathaniel leaned against the railing, the city lights reflecting in his eyes. "What would, though? What do you really want to do?" Whitney blinked at him, caught off guard. "I don't know. I guess I've been so focused on surviving that I haven't figured that part out yet." He nodded like her answer made perfect sense, and suddenly she didn't feel as awkward anymore. "Then maybe you're in the right spot," he said. They stayed up there for another hour. Whitney sat cross-legged on the cold concrete, sketching, while Nathaniel asked her questions about her art, her family, why she came to New York. She learned almost nothing about him, except that he ran a few companies, whatever that meant. When she finally stood up to leave, he surprised her again. "Come up here tomorrow," he said, not demanding, just calm and sure. "Same time." Whitney hesitated. "Why?" "Because maybe it's time someone reminded you that you're allowed to want more." The next night she went back. And the next. It became a thing. Every night after her shift at the coffee shop, she climbed the stairs to the rooftop, and Nathaniel would be there sometimes with takeout, sometimes with a bottle of wine. They talked about everything and nothing. She started to notice how he always wore the same watch, how he listened more than he spoke, how he never once made her feel small for not having it all figured out. One night, after a week of rooftop dinners, Whitney asked the question she'd been avoiding. "So, what exactly do you do?" Nathaniel didn't flinch. "I run Langston and Company. Real estate. Private investments. A little of everything." She froze. "Wait. Langston and Company? As in?" "Those luxury towers around Manhattan." He nodded. "You're that Langston?" she asked, stunned. "Guilty." She stared at him. "You're a millionaire?" He looked almost apologetic. "Several times over. Yeah." Whitney sat back, her heart hammering. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Would it have changed anything?" he asked quietly. She didn't answer. That night, she didn't stay long. She left before he could say anything else, her mind spinning. The next day, a package arrived at her apartment. It wasn't flowers or jewelry. It was a leather-bound sketchbook with her initials embossed on the cover and a note that read, "You deserve more than just air. You deserve to fly." And despite herself, Whitney smiled. 2 nights later, she went back to the rooftop. "I'm not used to people doing things for me without wanting something in return," she admitted. Nathaniel was quiet for a moment. "I don't want anything. I just like who you are. Up here with me." She looked at him. "But you have everything. Why waste time with someone like me?" He stepped forward, closer than ever before. "Because you're not a waste of time. You make me feel like I'm not just a name on a building." His voice was low. "You asked what I do? I spend my days making deals, running meetings, sitting in silence with people who smile with their mouths and lie with their eyes. But up here, with you, I can breathe." Whitney's chest tightened. "I don't know what I want yet." "Yes, you do," he said softly. "You just haven't said it out loud." She swallowed hard. Then maybe I want to stop feeling like I'm barely surviving. Nathaniel reached for her hand, warm and steady. Then let me show you what it feels like to live. She didn't pull away. That night, when he kissed her, it wasn't rushed. It was patient, like he was giving her time to decide, to feel everything. And she did. Every inch of her skin lit up, her heart pounded, and her world tilted just enough to make her realize she didn't want to go back to how things were before him. The next few weeks moved fast. Nathaniel invited her to a gallery opening his gallery, downtown, where her sketches suddenly hung in a private corner with a plaque that read, "Emerging Artist, Whitney Dawson." She didn't even know he'd taken them. "I'm not ready for this," she whispered, staring at the crowd mingling around her work. "You are," he said, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You just needed someone to believe it first." He bought her a dress for that night. She didn't ask the price, but she knew it was more than her rent again. He drove her in a sleek black car with a driver who called him Mr. Langston. He held her hand like it was the most natural thing in the world. Still, Whitney couldn't shake the feeling that maybe this wasn't her world. Maybe she didn't belong in his. But Nathaniel kept showing up. Rooftops turned into dinners at five-star restaurants. Sketchbooks turned into art classes he signed her up for quietly, without pressure. She started smiling more, laughing, living. One night, back on the rooftop where it all began, she turned to him. "I think I finally know what I want." He looked at her, eyes steady. "What?" "You." Nathaniel's breath caught. "Then I'm the luckiest man alive." The soft click of the elevator door closing behind her echoed through the penthouse foyer as Whitney stepped inside for the first time. It was a Saturday evening, and Nathaniel had invited her over for dinner, his idea, cooked by his private chef. "Unless you'd prefer I burn the place down trying to make pasta," he'd said. She hadn't known what to expect when she agreed. Certainly not floor-to-ceiling windows framing the skyline, or a grand piano gleaming in the corner beside a wall of bookshelves that looked more curated than read. She turned in a slow circle, taking it all in: the art, the polished floors, the crystal decanter on the bar cart. This wasn't just a home. It was a world. "You're early," Nathaniel called from deeper inside. "I was hoping I'd get a few extra minutes to pretend I know how to plate food." Whitney followed the voice to the kitchen, where he was barefoot and rolling up the cuffs of a pale blue shirt. The sleeves were already dusted with flour. "Please tell me you didn't bribe your chef to let you pretend you did all this." "Bribe is a strong word," he said, glancing at her with a grin. "I negotiated." Whitney laughed, but her gaze drifted toward the dining table behind him. A single-place setting had been arranged for each of them: silver cutlery, linen napkins, crystal stemware, and a vase of fresh white peonies in the center. "You set the table," she said, surprised. "I'm capable of a few normal things. Normal people don't use stemware that looks like it belongs in a museum. I'll have you know I bought those on a whim, because they reminded me of my grandmother's china. She would have approved of you, by the way." Whitney blinked. "Your grandmother?" "She was the only one who ever told me I didn't have to follow in anyone's footsteps if I didn't want to." He handed her a glass of wine and leaned back against the counter. "She died before I took over the companies. But sometimes I still hear her voice when I'm about to make a stupid decision." Whitney tilted her head. "And where does inviting me into your $7 million penthouse fall on the scale of stupid decisions?" "Somewhere between reckless and inevitable." She inhaled slowly, her fingers wrapping around the stem of the glass. "I've never been in a place like this before." Nathaniel didn't move. "You want to leave?" "No," she said quickly. I keep waiting for the part where it all falls apart." "It won't." "You say that like you can promise it." "I can't," he admitted. "But I can keep showing up." Dinner was better than she expected: steak with a red wine reduction, roasted carrots glazed in something she couldn't pronounce, and a dessert Nathaniel claimed had taken an embarrassing amount of time to get right. She believed him. The soufflé was perfect. Afterward, they moved to the living room, where he poured them each a second glass of wine and put on a jazz record that crackled softly in the background. Whitney curled her legs beneath her on the couch, watching him from across the room. "You could have had anyone," she said suddenly. "Someone who fits into this world without thinking twice." Nathaniel sat across from her, elbows on his knees. "Maybe I didn't want someone who fits. Maybe I wanted someone who sees it and still chooses to stay." She looked down.
"I'm scared, Nathaniel."
"I know. I keep thinking that if I fall into this, I'll lose myself." "Then let's make a deal," he said, voice low. "You don't lose yourself. I don't lose you." Her eyes lifted to his. "And what if I already feel like I'm starting to fall? Then I'll catch you." The gravity of his words settled between them, heavy and certain. The days that followed blurred into a rhythm Whitney hadn't known she craved. Nathaniel sent her links to artist residencies and offered to connect her with a gallerist uptown. She didn't always say yes, but he never pushed. Instead, he left space for her to decide what she wanted. One afternoon, she found herself in a sunlit studio in Soho, the space rented under her name, the lease quietly taken care of. "I didn't ask you to do this," she said when she confronted him about it. Nathaniel leaned against the studio's doorway, arms crossed. "No, but you looked at that place like it was oxygen. I just cleared the air." Whitney crossed the room and pulled the plastic off one of the new easels. "You're making it hard to keep my guard up. Maybe it's time you stop trying." "But what happens when the shine wears off?" He stepped inside. "You think that's what this is? Shine?" She didn't answer. Nathaniel reached for her hand, his touch gentle. "I don't care if you have paint under your nails, or if your hair's a mess after working all night. I care that you show up, that you dream out loud. The rest? That's just decoration." Whitney's throat tightened. "You make it sound so simple." "It is. Until it's not. And when it's not, we figure it out." She squeezed his hand. "I'm not used to this." "You don't have to be. Just don't run from it." That night, they walked through Central Park, the city glowing behind the trees. Nathaniel bought roasted almonds from a vendor and handed her the bag like a peace offering. She took one and bumped her shoulder against his. "You've ruined my standards for men forever." He raised a brow. "That's the goal." They wandered without a destination, the conversation drifting from childhood memories to the strangest things they'd ever eaten. Whitney told him about the time she tried to fundraise for an art camp by selling hand-painted rocks in her neighborhood. Nathaniel grinned. "How much did you make?" $17 and an expired bus pass. Sounds like a solid business model." They sat on a bench near the lake, the noise of the city fading into the background. "I used to think falling in love was like a switch on or off," she said. "And now I think it's more like a sunrise. You don't realize it's happened until it's already there, lighting everything up." Nathaniel turned toward her, his voice barely above a whisper. "Whitney." She met his eyes. "I'm already there." She didn't respond with words. She kissed him, soft and sure, and in that moment, nothing about their world felt borrowed. But the sunrise, she would soon learn, never came without shadows. Whitney stood frozen in the doorway of the studio, clutching the envelope that had just been slipped under it. The paper inside was glossy, thick, and cold in her hands. It was an invitation. Black tie required. Langston Foundation Annual Gala. The date was circled in red. This Friday. Her name was printed in bold across the top. Whitney Dawson. +1 optional. She knew what it meant. Knew this wasn't just another glamorous event in Nathaniel's world, it was the event. The one where the city's elite gathered to toast success with vintage champagne and whispered alliances behind diamond-studded smiles. And now she was being asked to step directly into it. When she called Nathaniel, her voice was steady, but her pulse raced. "What is this?" A night to celebrate the people who make my world better, he answered. You're one of them. I'm not ready for this. You don't have to be. Just come with me. She didn't say yes. But she didn't say no either. That Friday, a car pulled up to her building just after dark. She descended the stairs in a gown she hadn't chosen. He had sent it, custom fit, with a handwritten note that read simply, "Because you deserve to be seen." When the door opened, Nathaniel stepped out wearing a midnight blue tuxedo that looked like it had been tailored directly onto him. His eyes swept over her once, slow and reverent. "You look like a secret the world's not ready to hear yet," she exhaled. "And you look like you know it." He held out his arm. "Ready?" "No," she whispered. "But let's go anyway." The gala was held in an old Art Deco theater that had been converted into a glittering ballroom. Crystal chandeliers dripped from the ceiling like frozen waterfalls, and a live string quartet played from an elevated balcony. Waiters in white gloves passed trays of lobster tartlets, and champagne flutes filled to the rim. Whitney clung to Nathaniel's arm as they entered, aware of every eye that shifted toward them. A woman in emerald jewelry leaned close to a man in a navy suit, murmuring behind a manicured hand. A silver-haired businessman stopped mid-conversation to nod at Nathaniel in recognition before giving Whitney a once-over. She felt down to her shoes. Nathaniel leaned in. "Ignore them. They only stare because they've never seen something real." She gripped his hand tighter. They navigated the room slowly. Nathaniel greeted donors, investors, and board members with the same unshakable calm, but his hand never left hers. When he introduced her, he said her name like it held weight, not as an accessory, but as a declaration. "This is Whitney Dawson, artist, and the reason I'm still sane." During dinner, she was seated beside a woman who ran a global philanthropic network. Across from her sat a man who owned half the hotels in Dubai. The conversation flowed around her like a foreign language: mergers, acquisitions, tax shelters, but Nathaniel occasionally brushed his thumb against her palm under the table, grounding her. After dessert, a man walked up to their table whose presence shifted the air. He was younger than most in the room, maybe mid-30s, with silver cufflinks shaped like wolves. "Nathaniel," he said, pouring charm into every syllable. "Didn't expect to see you bring a guest this year." Nathaniel's smile faded just a fraction. "Whitney, this is Lucas Hale. We went to university together." "I've heard of you," Lucas said, eyes lingering just a moment too long. "Your exhibition at Alara Gallery was unexpected." Whitney blinked. It wasn't an exhibition, just a corner wall. Lucas turned to Nathaniel. "So she's modest, too. How refreshing." Nathaniel shifted his chair. "Lucas, was there something you needed?"
Lucas smiled, all teeth.
"Only to say that it's good to see you letting someone in. I wasn't sure you were capable of that anymore." After he left, Whitney leaned closer. "What was that?" Nathaniel's jaw was tight. "Old history. The kind you bury under concrete and hope never resurfaces." She didn't push. Later, as the music swelled and the night deepened, he led her to the edge of the balcony where the city glittered below like scattered stars. "I didn't bring you here just to show you off," he said quietly. "I know. I brought you here because I wanted you to see what I've built, and because I want to build something else with you." She turned to him, heart pounding. "You mean that?" "I've never meant anything more." Her reply was stolen by the sound of her phone vibrating in her clutch. She frowned and pulled it out. Unknown number. One message. She read it once, then again, the blood draining from her face. "What is it?" Nathaniel asked. Her hands trembled. It's from my landlord. My apartment. There was a fire." Nathaniel stiffened. "Is anyone hurt?"
"No."
"I wasn't there. But everything's gone. Everything." Without hesitation, he reached for her. "Then come with me. Stay at the penthouse." As long as you need. She hesitated. I don't want to be a charity case. You're not. His voice was firm. You're someone I care about.
Deeply.
Let me help you. Let me do this, not because you need it, but because I want to. Her breath caught. And just like that, the world she'd been so afraid to step into became the only place that felt like home. The floor-to-ceiling windows of Nathaniel's penthouse glowed with golden afternoon light as Whitney stood barefoot in the kitchen, a mug of chamomile tea warming her hands. The skyline outside shimmered, but her eyes were fixed on the blank canvas propped near the far wall. It had been sitting there for days untouched. Not for lack of inspiration, but because she hadn't yet figured out how to capture what her life had become. Nathaniel entered quietly, rolling up the sleeves of his soft gray shirt. You didn't sleep. Whitney glanced at him over her shoulder. Neither did you. He approached slowly and took the mug from her hands, setting it aside before brushing his fingers across her temple. The contractor just sent the updated list. The fire damage took everything beyond the walls. I know. Her voice was steady, but the weight behind it lingered. I keep thinking about the sketch of my mother I kept in the bottom drawer. I never even made a copy. Nathaniel's thumb brushed her cheek. You don't need to replace memories with things. You carry them. She nodded, not because it helped, but because she didn't want to fall apart again. Come with me, he said gently. To where? You'll see. They left the penthouse and took the elevator down to the garage. A sleek silver car awaited them, one she hadn't seen before. Nathaniel opened the door for her, and Whitney slid into the passenger seat, curiosity rising. They drove north, leaving the city behind, until the skyline gave way to open roads and late spring trees. She watched the scenery shift, quiet neighborhoods, then winding hills, and finally, after nearly 90 minutes, they arrived at a wrought iron gate flanked by stone pillars. Nathaniel keyed in a code, and the gate opened slowly to reveal a long gravel drive winding through tall oaks. At the end sat an old estate house, weathered but stately, with ivy climbing its stone facade and tall arched windows catching the late sun. Whitney stepped out of the car slowly. Where are we? My grandmother's house, he said, walking beside her. I haven't been back since the funeral. It's been sitting empty. She turned toward him, startled. Why bring me here? Nathaniel looked up at the house. Because when I was a boy, this was the only place I ever felt like I could be myself. And I want you to see that part of me. The one that existed before the boardrooms and the billion-dollar acquisitions. She followed him inside. The air was cool and still, and the house carried the kind of quiet that only came from long-held stories. Dust motes floated in the golden light pooling across the hardwood floors, and the faint scent of lilacs clung to the curtains. She used to sit right here, he said, pointing to the window seat in the library. Reading poetry to me. I didn't understand half of it, but I memorized every word. Whitney sank down beside him on the cushion. You never talk about her. I didn't want to share her with the world.
He paused.
But I want to share her with you. Their eyes met, and something shifted between them, something deeper than longing, steadier than desire. It's strange, Whitney whispered. I've spent so much of my life trying to escape everything that felt temporary. But this place, it feels like it remembers things for you. Nathaniel reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Her breath caught, but he didn't open it right away. I bought this months ago, he said quietly. Not because I was planning a moment like this, but because I knew. The first time you told me you wanted more, I knew I wanted to give you everything. Whitney's eyes burned. But I didn't want to ask until you knew who I was. Not just the man on the rooftop. Not just the name on the building. I know who you are, she said, her voice breaking. You're the man who sat with me when I couldn't breathe, who saw me before I saw myself. He opened the box. Inside was a ring unlike anything she expected.
No flesty diamonds.
Just a radiant sapphire set in a gold band, understated and beautiful.
This was hers, he said.
She told me once that love isn't about spark. It's about certainty, about knowing, even when everything else feels like noise. Whitney stared at it, her heart thundering. Nathaniel. I don't need an answer now, he said, holding her gaze. But I need you to know that when I look at you, I don't see someone who's trying to belong. I see someone who already does. She didn't hesitate. Yes. He blinked. Are you sure? She smiled through the tears. I've never been more sure of anything. Outside, the wind picked up, rustling the oaks, as if the house itself breathed a sigh of relief. Nathaniel slipped the ring onto her finger, and the weight of it felt like truth, quiet, undeniable, and permanent. They spent the rest of the evening walking the grounds, hand in hand. He showed her the old greenhouse where his grandmother grew orchids, the crumbling stone bench where he used to sit after getting into trouble, the attic where he kept journals filled with scribbled dreams. I want to restore it, he said as twilight deepened around them. Not just the house, the whole property. Turn it into something meaningful. Whitney looked up at him. Like an artist's retreat? He grinned. Exactly. I want to help, she said. Not just as your fiancé. As an artist. As someone who knows what it means to need that kind of space. Nathaniel leaned down and kissed her forehead. Then we'll build it together. They returned to the penthouse 2 days later. Whitney's new studio was waiting still untouched, but no longer intimidating. She opened the windows, let the breeze in, and finally picked up her brush. As the paint moved across the canvas, she didn't think about what she'd lost. She thought about what she'd found on a rooftop, in a stranger's eyes, in a life she never thought she could have. That night, Nathaniel came home to find the lights dimmed and the dining table set for two. No silver stemware.
No caterdistis.
Just homemade pasta and candles in mismatched holders. He laughed the second he walked in. You cooked. I tried. If it's inedible, there's backup pizza in the oven. He pulled her into his arms. I don't care what we eat. This is everything. As they sat down to dinner, Whitney glanced out the window. The city still roared below them. Too fast, too loud. But inside this space, she had something she'd never thought she'd find. Certainty. And when Nathaniel reached across the table and laced his fingers with hers, she realized she'd stopped surviving a long time ago. Now, she was finally living. Whitney stood at the edge of the courtyard behind the Langston estate, her bare feet pressed into the soft grass as the final golden rays of late summer sun spilled across the stone path. Around her, the once forgotten grounds were now alive with new possibilities. Ivy had been carefully trimmed, flower beds replanted, and the neglected greenhouse now stood with glass panes restored and shelves lined with blooming orchids, just as Nathaniel had remembered them. Look at this place, she said, brushing her fingers along the rim of an old fountain. It's like it finally exhaled. Nathaniel emerged from the arbor with his jacket slung over one shoulder, sleeves rolled to his forearms. It's because you gave it breath. No, she said, turning to face him. You did. You let it mean something again. He stepped forward and placed his hands lightly on her waist. We both did. The past few months had been a blur, but a beautiful one. After the fire, Whitney had slowly rebuilt not just her studio, but her sense of self. With Nathaniel's quiet encouragement and her own rising confidence, she had submitted a new series of paintings to a juried exhibit in Paris. They had been accepted. I've been thinking, Nathaniel said, drawing her from her thoughts. About what's next. She tilted her head. Please don't say another penthouse renovation. I'm still recovering from watching you pick curtain fabrics. He laughed.
No.
I meant for us. Her breath caught. Tell me. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. I bought this, he said, handing it to her. Under your name. Whitney unfolded it slowly. It was a deed. A small parcel of land adjacent to the estate. Her name was listed as sole owner. "I want you to build your retreat," he said. "The artist's sanctuary. You kept saying it was a dream, but dreams belong somewhere real. Somewhere permanent." She looked up sharply. "Nathaniel, this is... It's too much." "No," he said, his voice low. "It's exactly what it should be. You've given me more than I knew how to ask for. You saw the man I didn't know how to be, and loved him anyway." Her fingers tightened around the paper. "I didn't do any of this for gifts." "I know," he said. "That's why I wanted to give you everything." She stepped into him, pressing her forehead against his chest. "You already have." Later that evening, they walked the halls of the estate together. The walls had been freshly painted, but Whitney insisted on keeping one stretch of faded wallpaper in the dining room floral, chipped and utterly imperfect. "It's the only thing that still smells like her," Nathaniel explained when she asked. "I didn't want it gone." "You don't have to explain," she said. "Some things aren't meant to be erased." He led her upstairs, past the library and through a narrow corridor that ended in a small turret room with arched windows. Inside, the floors had been polished, and a single easel stood facing the view of the lake beyond the trees. "I thought this could be your private studio," he said, watching her reaction. She turned slowly in a circle, her fingers grazing the windowsill. "It's perfect. I hoped you'd say that." She looked over her shoulder. "You know, you keep giving me things I never knew how to ask for." Nathaniel leaned against the doorframe. "Maybe I just listen better than most." They spent the night in the old master bedroom, the one his grandmother had once used. The bed was new, but the carved wooden frame remained the same. As the fire crackled softly in the hearth, Whitney lay curled against him, her head resting on his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. "Tell me something you've never told anyone," she whispered. Nathaniel was quiet for a moment, then said, "I used to come out here as a kid and pretend I lived a different life. One without expectations. One where I could choose who I became." She reached up and touched his jaw. "You did choose. Maybe not right away, but you found it." He caught her hand and kissed her palm. "Because I found you." The next morning, they hosted a small gathering in the restored greenhouse.
Not a gala.
No press. Just a few close friends, some artists Whitney had met through her Paris exhibit, and Nathaniel's sister, who had flown in from London with her twin daughters in tow. As the sun filtered through the glass ceiling, painting the space in soft gold, Whitney stood before the small crowd with Nathaniel's arm around her waist. "We wanted to share this place with you," she said, her voice strong. "Because it's not just a home. It's the beginning of something we're building together. A space for artists to grow, to breathe, to create without fear. A space where dreams don't feel out of reach." They raised glasses, clinked gently, and laughter filled the space like music. Outside, the grounds buzzed with energy as the first group of artists began settling into the newly renovated guest cottages scattered across the property. Later, Whitney and Nathaniel slipped away to a small bench beneath a willow tree near the lake. "Do you ever miss the city?" she asked, watching ducks glide across the water. "I don't miss who I was in it," he said. "But I'm grateful it brought me to a rooftop where someone changed everything." She smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. "Do you think your grandmother would have liked me?" "I think she would have adored you," he said, "and told me not to screw it up." "You haven't." "I won't." They sat in silence for a long while, the breeze rustling the branches above them, the future stretching wide and open before them, not rushed, not forced, but steady and sure. That fall, Whitney's retreat officially opened its doors to artists from around the world. The program became known for its quiet brilliance, a place where creativity wasn't just encouraged, it was protected. Nathaniel continued to run his companies, but his time was now split between boardrooms and the land that had once been a memory. They were married the following spring in the courtyard beneath the same archway where Nathaniel had first told her he wanted to build something with her. The ceremony was intimate, filled with wildflowers and laughter, and when he whispered his vows, he said the words she still thought about every night. "You didn't just change my life, Whitney. You gave it back to me." Years passed, but none of it dulled. The love, the fire, the way he looked at her across a room full of people as if she were still the only person who mattered. And in the quiet moments when she painted by the window while he read nearby, or when he kissed her temple before sleep, she knew one thing with certainty.
This
Was the life she had always been meant to live.
together.
Forever.